Hello everybody, this is Mr. Rob and welcome back to another episode of the Los Angeles Clippers MyNBA series here on NBA 2K24, where today we have reached the All-Star break, so it's a good time to recap what's gone on so far in the season, as well as recap the All-Star festivities and see what happens in the final 2 months of the NBA season and kind of set the stage for that span. So if you're excited for this one, make sure you drop a like and you subscribe down below, especially if you want more franchise content. Now, we've made it to the All-Star break. The Clippers sit 26-28, and, well, I've actually simmed through the All-Star break festivities. I did not mean to, but I accidentally hit sim season when I was simming to this game against the Grizzlies, and the good thing I was able to stop it before I got to the Grizzlies game. But I did sim the All-Star festivities, so we'll quickly go through it real quick. On the first night, the Team World did beat Team USA, and Ron Holland led the way for Team USA, the number one overall pick from the NBA G League night for the Chicago Bulls, but it was NBA World that was led by not a lot of people with 11 points, but Victor Wembanyama was the star for that game to win the Rising Stars Challenge. As far as the contests go, the three-point contest was won by Klay Thompson, who is, if you remember, now a Sacramento King after a short stint to begin the season with the Orlando Magic. And then the slam dunk contest winner was Zion Williamson. So yes, he participated, did not hurt himself, was not hurt already, and did win that contest. And then finally, the NBA All-Star Game. It says Team Giannis versus Team Luka, but I did draft the All-Star, so it was East versus West. And it looks like the East team did win the NBA All-Star Game, 119-114. Donovan Mitchell led the way with 19 points, while on the West side, it was Luka himself who led it with 27. A couple of first-time All-Stars. We did not have any All-Stars, but there were a couple of first-time. Josh Giddey made it with 7 points. We also saw on the other side from the Eastern Conference a couple of players make it for the first time, which is always exciting. There's Allen right there who had 8. But a not pretty exciting All-Star game, relatively tame by All-Star game standards, with only 119 being the winning score. But let's go ahead and recap the league now. We sit 26-28, which if you look at the standings, that is good for 8th in the Western Conference. So again, we're hanging out in that play-in range. I do think we are better than a play-in tournament team, which is, a little disappointing, but we decided to stay pat at the trade deadline. If you remember the trade deadline, there were some pretty big moves. We saw the 3-team trades, especially that sent DeMar DeRozan to the Golden State Warriors and Andrew Wiggins to the New York Knicks, and a couple of other draft picks trade around, a couple of role players on the move like Obi Toppin to Chicago and DiVincenzo to Golden State. We also saw Bronny James get reunited with his father. He's out there in Los Angeles, the Lakers now, as they traded a couple of picks to the Knicks. And then obviously there was the other sort of moves that happened earlier on in the season. But those are the ones that we saw last episode at the trade deadline. But back to the standings, we are only 2 games out of the 6th spot against the Portland Trail Blazers, so not too far from being just a solidified team. And as far as the 10 spot, we host a 2-game lead over the Rockets, so we are firmly entrenched in the playoff battle. The best team in the Western Conference is the Oklahoma City Thunder, which is the best team in the NBA. They have a 38-16 record. We saw the Timberwolves last episode. They are the second best in the West, followed by the Kings at the 3 spot, which is why they were willing to acquire Klay Thompson. Dallas Mavericks at the 4, the Phoenix Suns are the 5, Trailblazers the 6, Golden State the 7, despite no Steph Curry, us the 8, San Antonio the 9, and then 10, the Rockets. The worst team in the West, the Los Angeles Lakers. Yes, they are the worst team in the Western Conference, which is a little upsetting if you're a LeBron James fan, but, I have to wonder how much he has left in the tank. As far as the Eastern Conference goes, the top team over there is the Cleveland Cavaliers. They are sitting 36-19, but only a half game behind them is the 2-time Eastern Conference champions in the Miami Heat, trying to make it back to the finals for the 3rd straight season, and hopefully get a win this time. The Atlanta Hawks, or the 3 seed, they sit 34-20, despite selling out, trading away both DeJounte Murray and Trae Young. They're still the 3 seed. A very interesting move from Atlanta, but hey, I guess if it works for them. The Knicks, who were active at the deadline, they sit 4th at 33-22, followed by the Pacers in the 5. The 76ers, the 6, who surprisingly stood quiet. There were some rumors that they were interested in Kawhi Leonard, but we did not deal him to Philly. 7 is the Milwaukee Bucks. The 8 is the Wizards, despite being one of the worst teams last year. They're playing pretty solid after the Pascal Siakam signing in the offseason. The Hornets, the 9, and the 10 is the Orlando Magic. who did acquire De'Aaron Fox this year. Worst team in the Eastern Conference, which is the worst team in the league, is the Brooklyn Nets, who did acquire, though, Trae Young. And then also the Celtics behind them. They just can't seem to put it together. It's the second straight year where Boston has really struggled. Speaking of teams that struggle, I just want to highlight one more team. The Grizzlies, who won the championship last year, are 23-32. It has been a big fall from grace for the Memphis Grizzlies. We'll go to stats now in terms of player stats, as we'll take a look at our team first, as we'll look at points per game wise. Our best scorer per game is Paul George, 23.7 points per game. And if you remember, he just signed the contract extension to be with his team for another 3 years on a nice pay cut. So Paul George will be staying in Los Angeles. That's obviously what he wants. And, well, he wants to stay here and potentially win a championship. He's willing to take the cut of money to do it. Well, let's see what we can do in the offseason. But it's going to be a very interesting time for us this offseason. Almost everybody on the team is a free agent. But he's playing really good basketball. He missed most of last year with that dislocated left patella, so it's good to have him back healthy this year, and he's playing really well because of it. Behind him is James Harden, 22.3 points per game for the Beard. Acquired, obviously, last year, the big trade from the Philadelphia 76ers, and he's been a welcome addition since. His numbers have gone down, though. He is 35, so he's definitely regressing. But, 3-point underneath 40%, despite, being 42.5 last year. His numbers are down across the board, but, he's still a high-level scorer. He can always pop off at any time, go for 40+. So he's been a very good point/shooting guard. He's played more off-ball for us this year. That's because the main point guard has been Nashawn Highland. Bones has played really well this year as a starter. He's been given the chance, and, he's averaging 17.5 points per game, which is not as good per 36 minutes, but, we have a lot of superstars on this team. But he's played really good. I've been very impressed with him on the offensive side of things. Obviously, he's never going to be the best defender at only 6'2", 169 pounds, but he has been a very good help to our big three. And I do like Nashawn Highland, and I don't think he's under contract past this year. So he's going to be one of our priorities this offseason, as we reevaluate basically the entire team. Then you have Kawhi Leonard, who is probably the best, as people would say, of the big three, but he has not played like it. Yes, he's battled some injuries, but his numbers are only 16.6 points per game, and his 3-point percentage is down almost 6%, only 35.5 from 3. His field goals are a little down. His numbers per 36 minutes are down. I mean, he's being a little bit more of a distributor, 3.5 assists, and but he's kind of letting George and Harden do it. But I'd like to see Kawhi Leonard step up a little bit. I mean, he is probably our best player all around, offense and defense, and I feel like he just needs to step up a little bit more on the offense. I think that'll really push the team over the edge. So if we can get Kawhi Leonard going, that's probably the biggest key of the second half of the season. Then we get into everybody else where there's a big drop-off. Brandon Boston Jr. is next. He's averaging 10 points per game, which is really good because he's played most of this year off the bench. If you look at his per 36 numbers, that's better than he was last year. And 2 years ago, he had 20. So maybe he needs to get a little bit more of an opportunity, maybe get an extended role off the bench. I do think we're a little crowded at the wing position, so that's not really maximizing his minutes, but his numbers across the board are way better. So I'd like to see maybe more of him down the stretch. That's where he excelled last year. He played a lot better post-All-Star break, and we're hoping that same split happens this season. Then we get to Ivica Zubac, who's out for the rest of the year with a broken left leg. He would be ready for the playoffs if we get there, but I've been very critical of him with his slowness getting back on defense, kind of a liability on that side. Offensively, he kind of disappears for periods of time, but he is still a key piece of the starting lineup, and that's a starter that we're going to be down. And center is a position that we have a lot of guys who could play center, but we don't have a lot of guys, in my opinion, who could play at a high level. It's a very old group of players behind him, so I do think Zubac may be missed, especially in that pick and roll game. And the other guys off the bench, Chris Dunn is next. He was signed at the beginning of the year by basically our assistant GM. I did not sign Chris Dunn, but he's been a pretty solid backup point guard, averaging 7.5 points per game since coming over from the Utah Jazz. His numbers from 3 have been a little bit worse, but his field goal percentage is way up. He's gotten to the basket a lot more, a good facilitator off the bench, more assists than he had last year, and he's not even starting. He will, though, miss the first 2 games post All-Star break with his suspension, just like in real life, so we will not see him for at least a week. Marcus Morris Sr. is next, averaging 7 points per game. He's going to basically be our starting center now that Zubac is hurt. Him and Blake Griffin might alternate that role, and Robert Covington. So we'll have to see who steps up. Obviously, he was with the team for a long time. We traded him last year as part of that James Harden trade, and then he came back in the offseason. Now, he has also decided to call it quits after this year, so this is the last little extension that we'll see of Marcus Morris Sr., so let's make him go out with a bang. Then we have Riley Kugel, our only draft pick from last year, who was a second-round pick out of Florida, and I'm actually glad that we picked him. He's averaging 7 points per game, which is pretty good, and if you look at his 36 numbers, that's insane. But he spent a lot of this year in our Ontario Clippers squad. He's still actually down there. Maybe we could actually go and take a look at one of those games. Maybe that'll be something fun to do in the second half of the season, especially if we kind of fall apart. But Riley Kugel's a guy who's one of the only guys who's actually signed past this season, so I'm excited to see what he can do maybe next year and beyond. I like him, the former Florida Gator. Kevin Love is next, another guy who's decided to call it quits after this year. He came over in the offseason, obviously familiarity with Tyronn Lue in their time with Cleveland, and then he's been with Miami the past 2 years when they made it to the finals. So kind of a welcome, just veteran presence off of the bench back here in Los Angeles after going to college at UCLA. I mean, he hasn't really wowed us. He's starting, but I don't know. He's also called it a career at the end of the day, but I think his mentorship is more of what Kevin Love is all about at this point in his time with the Clippers. Then we have Robert Covington, another guy who can play down low a little bit, who can get some starting minutes a little bit better this year statistically wise. He just hasn't really gotten the chance. And I was a fan of Robert Covington last year. Big Cove, as I like to call him, as you know, he played pretty good, I would say, for us down the stretch. And with Zubats getting hurt, he's definitely going to see an increase in his minutes. So we'll see if he can capitalize on that side of play, because all of his shooting percentages are up across the board. Then we get into Furkan Korkmaz. He was the other guy who came over in the James Harden trade. He's kind of been more of a role player. I've always liked Korkmaz in this series. I think he could shoot the rock pretty well off the bench. But, you know, there's just a lot of guys at the wing ahead of him. So he's only averaging 4.3 points per game. Blake Griffin's another guy down the board. He's battled some injuries. He's back here in LAC for a final season. He's going to call it quits after this year at the same place that he began. So kind of like Morris and Love, we're trying to send our big man out on a high note. And then Amir Coffey's up next, 2.9. Really not much else to say about him. I don't really care for him, to be honest. But that's our team. We'll take a look at the whole league, so to speak, as we'll take a look at who is leading the thing. Actually, we've got to go to league leaders for that. Oops, player stats again. And there we are, league leaders. And we'll do it by points per game. Your highest point per game guy right now is Luka Doncic, who's looking like an MVP candidate. He was the highest player on the All-Star game. 32 points per game, 11 rebounds, a double-double for him. Like I said, the front runner right now for the MVP. Then you have Shea, who's done a very good job this season leading the Thunder to the 1 seed. Honestly, if you're going MVP, I mean, he might be a more valuable player than Luka Doncic. Yes, Oklahoma City also has Josh Giddey, but I think Shea is not to be played with. 26 years old, too, only going to get better. 32 points per game. That's pretty incredible. I know Doncic's numbers are way better, but Shea is playing like at the top of his game. Then you have Damian Lillard of the Miami Heat with 30+. He's the only other guy with 30+. Still a big-time scorer out there in South Beach. Darius Garland right behind him. The reason why the Cleveland Cavaliers are the 1 seed in the East. He's playing really good basketball, almost double-double with 9.5 assists per game. Devin Booker is 5. And then we do have LeBron James, despite being on the worst team in the league, with 27-2. Worst team in the West, sorry. And then Ja Morant, who's always a shooter, both on and off the court. And then Giannis, Zion, and Karl-Anthony Towns round out your top 10. As far as rebounds, your highest rebounder is Victor Wembanyama. So he's really stepping up, 12.5 rebounds per game, and then 23 points as well, which was down the list. But Wemby has really stepped up in his second year in the league, and he's only going to get better. Jared Allen right behind him, named to the All-Star game this year. He's got a double-double as well. Nikola Jokic almost averaging another triple-double. I think he was robbed of the MVP last year. He's trying to make another case for it this year. And then Anthony Davis and Kayvon Looney of the Warriors round out the top 5 in rebounds. Assists, there's only one player averaging double-digit assists, and that's Tyrese Halliburton of the Indiana Pacers. The Pacers are just one of those quiet teams that minds their business and seems to make the playoffs. So we'll see if he can get them farther in the postseason. As far as steals, 2.4 for Jimmy Butler, the only guy averaging over 2. And then blocks, Mitchell Robinson leads the way despite being out with a dislocated left elbow, or right elbow, excuse me. But that does it for this recap episode. Next episode, we will face the Memphis Grizzlies and try to get on to the second half of the season. But I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. If you did, make sure you drop a like and you subscribe down below, especially if you want more franchise and basketball content. This is Mr. Rob, and I'll see you in the next one.